Most people think they know this story. The yacht, the drugs, the FBI raid, Leonardo DiCaprio stumbling down the driveway. 3 hours of chaos, excess, and madness. And when the credits rolled, most people walked away thinking, okay, I get it. Rich guy went too far, got caught, went to jail. Story over. But here's what nobody told you. The movie was based on Jordan Belfort's own book. He sold the rights. He consulted on the production. He approved the version of events you saw on screen. Which means the story you watched was the story he wanted you to see. The real one is different. The real story doesn't begin with a Wall Street office. It begins with a bankrupt meat salesman from Queens who discovered something dangerous, that the right words, delivered the right way, could make a person believe almost anything. The real story involves shell companies buried so deep that the FBI spent years trying to trace them. It involves Swiss bank accounts, offshore money laundering, and connections to organized crime figures that never made it into a single frame of that film. The real story ends not with a man who lost everything, but with a man who turned his own crimes into a $100 million brand, walked away owing over $110 million to his victims, and built a career teaching other people how to sell. The movie gave you the lifestyle. This video is going to give you the blueprint. Because once you understand exactly how Jordan Belfort built his machine, step by step, layer by layer, you'll realize that what you watched in that cinema wasn't a cautionary tale. It was an edited highlight reel. Let's start from the beginning. Before we get to the fraud, we need to understand who Jordan Belfort actually was, because the movie skips something important. Jordan Belfort grew up in Bayside, Queens. Working-class family. Smart kid. Ambitious. But broke. His first real business venture. Selling Italian ices on the beach at age 16. He and his friend made $20,000 in one summer. His first taste of what selling could do. But ambition grew faster than opportunity. He enrolled in dental school. 3 weeks in, the dean looked him dead in the eye and said, "The golden age of dentistry is over. If you're here to make money, you're in the wrong place." So Belfort quit. Just like that. He pivoted to selling meat and seafood door-to-door on Long Island. And he was good. He expanded, hired a team, built a small operation. Then it collapsed. He went bankrupt at 25 years old. Here's what most people miss about that failure. Belfort later said it taught him the single most dangerous lesson of his life. You don't need a great product. You need a great pitch. The seafood business failed because the business model was bad. But his selling skills, those were elite. He just needed something that didn't spoil and didn't require refrigerated trucks. He found it. It was called stocks. In 1987, Belfort landed a job at L.F. Rothschild, a legitimate Wall Street brokerage. He trained under a senior broker named Mark Hanna. Now pay attention to what Hanna allegedly told him, because this becomes the blueprint for everything. The name of the game is moving the money from the client's pocket into your pocket. Belfort absorbed everything. The scripts, the psychology, the way you create urgency in a buyer, the way you make someone feel like they are getting access to something exclusive. Then Black Monday hit. October 1987. The market crashed. L.F. Rothschild collapsed. Belfort was out of a job. He drifted to a small firm in Long Island. Not a Wall Street firm. A penny stock boiler room. And here, in this grimy little office, he discovered the loophole that would make him untouchable. For a while, penny stocks trading under $5, were largely unregulated. They flew under the radar of the SEC. And the commissions, 50%. Not the 1 or 2% you'd get on a legitimate stock. 50. But even more importantly, these companies were often shells. Ghost companies, worth almost nothing. Which meant whoever controlled the supply of shares could control the price. Belfort immediately understood what that meant. If you own the stock before the brokers start selling it, you don't make a commission. You make a fortune. In 1989, Jordan Belfort co-founded Stratton Oakmont, named to sound like a century-old British institution. The name was fiction. Everything about it was engineered to project legitimacy. Now here's where the movie glosses over the most important part. The movie shows you the lifestyle. The cars, the drugs, the parties. It does not clearly explain the business model. So let's break it down. Step 1. Acquire the stock secretly. Before Stratton Oakmont brokers ever made a single phone call about a company, Belfort and his inner circle would quietly acquire massive amounts of shares in that company at almost zero cost. Through shell companies, through family members, through trusted associates. The real ownership was buried so deep that regulators couldn't easily trace it back to Belfort. Step 2. The pump. Now Stratton Oakmont's team of hundreds of brokers, young, hungry, commission-driven brokers, would start making calls, using scripts Belfort himself designed. They would pitch these penny stocks to wealthy individuals across America as once-in-a-lifetime opportunities. They created artificial demand. The stock price rose, sometimes dramatically. Step 3. The dump. As the price climbed, Belfort and his inner circle would quietly sell their shares at the inflated price. Massive profits, tens of millions, sometimes more. Then the stock would collapse. And the clients, the regular people on the other end of those phone calls, would be left holding worthless paper. This is what's called a pump and dump scheme. But what made Belfort's version different, what made it so profitable and so hard to prosecute, was the scale, the layers, the sophistication. They used what investigators called rat holes, trusted third parties who held shares on behalf of Belfort, giving him plausible deniability. The ownership was disguised across dozens of entities. They manipulated trading volume internally. Brokers at Stratton would trade stock back and forth between client accounts to create the illusion of real market activity. At its peak, Stratton Oakmont had over 1,000 brokers. It had managed over 35 IPOs. It was generating hundreds of millions of dollars. And it was built entirely on manufactured reality. Here's what the movie really didn't show you. As the money piled up, Belfort had a new problem: where to put it. You can't deposit $20 million in cash without triggering every financial watchdog in the country. So Belfort built a second operation, a money laundering network. Investigators later documented connections between Stratton Oakmont and individuals linked to organized crime in New York, people who had their own offshore infrastructure, their own channels for moving money across borders, and their own reasons to stay quiet. Specifically, court documents reference connections to individuals associated with the Genovese crime family. Belfort's key move was to smuggle cash and securities out of the United States into Switzerland through a private Swiss bank called Bankrupt. The method: he used his wife's aunt, a woman named Patricia Ticker, as a nominee account holder. He flew her to Switzerland to open accounts. He had associates physically carry cash in suitcases and money belts across the Atlantic. According to court documents and his own later admissions, Belfort was managing approximately $40 million in Swiss accounts. Hidden, offshore, protected. Or so he thought. The mob connection wasn't incidental. When you're running an operation this size, you need protection. You need people who will not talk. You need leverage. This wasn't just a Wall Street fraud. At its core, it was organized crime, dressed in Italian suits and operating out of a Long Island office park. Now let's talk about the drugs, the parties, and the insanity inside Stratton Oakmont, but from a business perspective. Because the way Belfort ran that office was not random. It was not just hedonism. It was an engineered psychological system for maximum control. Think about what Belfort was asking his brokers to do. He needed them to call wealthy strangers and convince them, using high-pressure scripts, to invest their savings in fraudulent stocks, and then do it again tomorrow, and the next day. 4 years. The drugs and the parties served a function. They created dependency. If your most exciting moments, your highest highs, your sense of identity and belonging, all came from Stratton Oakmont, then you were never going to leave. You were never going to talk. You were never going to stop. Belfort cultivated loyalty through excess. His brokers were paid enormous commissions, more money than most of them had ever dreamed of. They were celebrated like heroes. And they were surrounded by a culture so extreme, so insulated from the outside world, that the line between what was legal and what wasn't stopped feeling relevant. Former employees described it as genuinely cult-like. Some said they knew, on some level, that what they were doing was wrong, but the money, the culture, and the peer pressure made it feel impossible to walk away. This is how Belfort maintained an army of salespeople willing to defraud thousands of Americans day after day. Not through fear. Through manufactured euphoria. By the mid-1990s, Stratton Oakmont was on the FBI's radar. But bringing it down was harder than it looked, because Belfort had lawyers, had layers, and had plausible deniability built into every level of the operation. What actually brought it down was not one moment. It was a chain. First, Steve Madden. You know, the shoe brand. What most people don't know is that Stratton Oakmont took Steve Madden Limited public in 1993 and manipulated the IPO. Madden himself was later convicted and served time. But more importantly, this deal drew intense regulatory scrutiny directly onto the firm. Second, the Swiss banks flipped. When American prosecutors began pressuring Swiss financial institutions in the late 1990s, the offshore system Belfort had built started cracking. Nominee account holders were questioned. Paper trails emerged. The accounts he believed were untouchable were suddenly very touchable. Third, and this is what truly ended everything, someone inside the operation cooperated with the FBI. Danny Porish, Belfort's co-founder, the man played by Jonah Hill in the movie. He began providing testimony and evidence that Belfort could not explain away. In 1998, the SEC permanently barred Belfort from the securities industry. Stratton Oakmont had already collapsed. In 1999, he was indicted on charges of securities fraud and money laundering. He agreed to cooperate with prosecutors. He gave up names. He wore a wire. He helped investigators bring down others in exchange for leniency. In 2003, he was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. He served 22 months. 22 months. For a fraud that victimized over 1,500 people and cost them an estimated $200 million. Let that sit for a second. Now here is the part of this story that doesn't get told enough. As part of his plea agreement, Belfort was ordered to repay $110.4 million to his victims. The cooperation. The reduced sentence. The understanding was that he would make things right. Here is what actually happened. 4 years after his release, Belfort paid back almost nothing. By 2013, a full decade after his sentencing, he had reportedly returned less than $12 million of the $110 million owed. Federal prosecutors formally complained. Victims were furious and largely ignored. And while his victims waited, Belfort reinvented himself. He wrote a memoir. It became a bestseller. Martin Scorsese turned it into an Oscar-nominated film starring Leonardo DiCaprio. Belfort was paid for the rights. He consulted on the production. He appeared in it. He became a motivational speaker, a sales training guru, charging tens of thousands of dollars per appearance, teaching audiences the same persuasion techniques he used to defraud them. He toured the world, Australia, the UK, Canada. In some countries, fraud victims and advocacy groups protested his appearances. In 2013, Australian authorities publicly expressed outrage that he was being paid to speak there while victims remained unpaid. The ultimate irony. Jordan Belfort became famous, wealthy, and globally recognized because of the fraud. The crime made him the brand. As of the most recent reporting available, the $110 million ordered in 1999 remains largely unpaid. The people who lost their retirement savings, their college funds, their life's work, many of them never saw a dollar returned. The Wolf of Wall Street didn't just escape justice. He Monetized it. So what's the real lesson here? Hollywood gave you a movie about a man who partied too hard and went to jail for it. That's not what this story is. This is a story about a system, a perfectly engineered machine that turned manipulation into millions, that used psychology as a weapon, that co-opted organized crime to protect itself, and that ultimately punished the wrong people the hardest. The brokers who worked the phones, most of them young, naive, desperate for money, many of them went to prison or were permanently barred from the industry. The victims, over 1,500 of them, lost real money that was never returned. And the architect, he got 22 months, a book deal, a Hollywood movie, and a global speaking career. The real Wolf of Wall Street didn't get devoured by the system. He sold it a ticket. If this video gave you the full story that the movie never did, hit that like button. And if you want more videos exposing the real mechanics behind the world's biggest businesses, subscribe. There are stories far bigger than Jordan Belfort still waiting to be told. I'll see you in the next one.